Hello everyone, it's Mr. Nobody, and I'm bringing you another great literature reading. Although this time around I'm going to be cheating because I'm going to be reading you a few Shakespeare stories, and if you just only have a passing familiarity with Shakespeare, not the ones that you're as familiar with, so no Romeo and Juliet. Instead of reading the actual plays, though, which would take a long time, I'm going to read to you from this, The Children's Shakespeare, which is a fun little book from my parents' basement. This isn't a super recent version, but look, it's by E. Nesbit. How fun is that? If you're not familiar with E. Nesbit, a wonderful children's author from way back in the day, I seem to recall that C.S. Lewis, I believe he said that E. Nesbit was a bit of an inspiration for him in writing his Chronicles of Narnia. So I'm going to just read the introduction to you, and then we'll read a few of the short versions of the plays. Introduction. It was evening. The fire burned brightly in the inn parlor. We'd been that day to Shakespeare's house, and I had told the children all that I could about him and his work. Now they were sitting by the table, poring over a big volume of the master's plays, lent them by the landlord, and I, with eyes fixed on the fire, was wandering happily in the immortal dreamland peopled by Rosalind and Imogen, Lear and Hamlet. A small sigh roused me. "I can't understand a word of it," said Iris. "And you said it was so beautiful," Rosamond added, reproachfully. "What does it all mean?" "Yes," Iris went on, "you said it was a fairy tale, and we've read 3 pages, and there's nothing about fairies, not even a dwarf or a fairy godmother." "And what does misgraft mean? And vantage, and austerity, and belike, and edict, and—" "Stop, stop," I cried. "I will tell you the story." In a moment they were nestling beside me, cooing with the pleasure that the promise of a story always brings them. But you must be quiet a moment, and let me think. In truth, it was not easy to arrange the story simply. Even with the recollection of Lamb's tales to help me, I found it hard to tell the Midsummer Night's Dream in words that these little ones could understand. But presently I began the tale, and then the words came fast enough. When the story was ended, Iris drew a long breath. "It is a lovely story," she said, "but it doesn't look at all like that in the book." "It's only put differently," I answered. "You'll understand when you grow up that the stories are the least part of Shakespeare." "But it's the stories we like," said Rosamond. "You see, he did not write for children." "No, but you might," cried Iris, flushed with a sudden idea. "Why don't you write the stories for us so we can understand them, just as you told us that? And then when we grow up, we shall understand the play so much better. Do. Ah, do, you will, won't you? You must." "Oh, well, if I must, I said. And so they settled it for me, and for them these tales were written." And if you followed my readings of stories like the Rudyard Kipling stories, you know that I love stories like this that were originally written for someone's own dear children. I don't know if that story is entirely true from the introduction, but it's not implausible. Look at The Hobbit. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit for his own children. Often, the things and the people that we love give birth to the greatest stories. So I'm going to read you A Winter's Tale. And there's also some nice little illustrations in here. Try to get it. Okay, I think you can see it there. Okay. So this is just the story of these Shakespeare stories. Not all the grand language, much as I love the language. And of course, I've talked about the graphic novels and how much I love the way that they do give you some wonderful bits of the language. This is just the stories. The Winter's Tale. Leontes was the king of Sicily, and his dearest friend was Polixenes, king of Bohemia. They'd been brought up together and only separated when they reached man's estate, and each had to go and rule over his kingdom. After many years, when each was married and had a son, Polixenes came to stay with Leontes in Sicily. Leontes was a violent-tempered man and rather silly, and he took it into his stupid head that his wife Hermione liked Polixenes better than she did him, her own husband. When once he had got this into his head, nothing could put it out, and he ordered one of his lords, Camillo, to put a poison in Polixenes' wine. Camillo tried to dissuade him from this wicked action, but finding he was not to be moved, pretended to consent. He then told Polixenes what was proposed against him, and they fled from the court of Sicily that night, and returned to Bohemia, where Camillo lived on as Polixenes' friend and counselor. Leontes threw the queen into prison, and her son, the heir to the throne, died of sorrow to see his mother so unjustly and cruelly treated. While the queen was in prison, she had a little baby, and a friend of hers named Paulina had the baby dressed in its best, and took it to show the king, thinking that the sight of his helpless little daughter would soften his heart towards his dear queen, who had never done him any wrong, and who loved him a great deal more than he deserved. But the king would not look at the baby, and ordered Paulina's husband to take it away in a ship, and leave it in the most desert and dreadful place he could find, which Paulina's husband, very much against his will, was obliged to do. Then the poor queen was brought up to be tried for treason in preferring Polixenes to her king, but really she had never thought of anyone except Leontes, her husband. Leontes had sent some messengers to ask the god Apollo whether he was not right in his cruel thoughts of the queen, but he had not patience to wait till they came back, and so it happened that they arrived in the middle of the trial. The oracle said, "Hermione is innocent, Polixenes blameless, Camillo a true subject, Leontes a jealous tyrant, and the king shall live without an heir if that which is lost be not found." Then a man came and told them that the little prince was dead. The poor queen, hearing this, fell down in a fit, and then the king saw how wicked and wrong he had been. He ordered Paulina and the ladies who were with the queen to take her away and try to restore her, but Paulina came back in a few moments and told the king that Hermione was dead. Now Leontes' eyes were at last opened to his folly. His queen was dead, and the little daughter who might have been a comfort to him he had sent away to be the prey of wolves and kites. Life had nothing left for him now. He gave himself up to his grief and passed many sad years in prayer and remorse. The baby princess was left on the seacoast of Bohemia, the very kingdom where Polixenes reigned. Paulina's husband never went home to tell Leontes where he had left the baby, for as he was going back to the ship, he met a bear and was torn to pieces. So there was an end of him. But the poor deserted little baby was found by a shepherd. She was richly dressed and had with her some jewels, and a paper was pinned to her cloak, saying that her name was Perdita, and that she came of noble parents. The shepherd, being a kind-hearted man, took home the little baby to his wife, and they brought it up as their own child. She had no more teaching than a shepherd's child generally has, but she inherited from her royal mother many graces and charms, so that she was quite different from the other maidens in the village where she lived. One day, Prince Floresell, the son of the good king of Bohemia, was hunting near the shepherd's house and saw Perdita, now grown up to a charming woman. He made friends with the shepherd, not telling him that he was the prince, but saying that his name was Doricles, and that he was a private gentleman, and then being deeply in love with the pretty Perdita, he came almost daily to see her. The king could not understand what it was that took his son nearly every day from home, so he set people to watch him, and then found out that the heir of the king of Bohemia was in love with Perdita, the pretty shepherd girl. Polixenes, wishing to see whether this was true, disguised himself and went with the faithful Camillo, in disguise also, to the old shepherd's house. They arrived at the feast of sheep-shearing, and though strangers, they were made very welcome. There was dancing going on, and a peddler was selling ribbons and laces and gloves, which the young men bought for their sweethearts. Floresell and Perdita, however, were taking no part in this gay scene, but sat quietly together talking. The king noticed the charming manners and great beauty of Perdita, never guessing that she was the daughter of his old friend Leontes. He said to Camillo, "This is the prettiest low-born lass that ever ran on the green sward. Nothing she does or seems but smacks of something greater than herself, too noble for this place." And Camillo answered, "In truth, she is the queen of curds and cream." But when Floresell, who did not recognize his father, called upon the strangers to witness his betrothal with the pretty shepherdess, the king made himself known and forbade the marriage, adding that if she ever saw Floresell again, he would kill her and her old father, the shepherd, and with that he left them. But Camillo remained behind, for he was charmed with Perdita and wished to befriend her. Camillo had long known how sorry Leontes was for that foolish madness of his, and he longed to go back to Sicily to see his old master. He now proposed that the young people should go there and claim the protection of Leontes. So they went, and the shepherd went with them, taking Perdita's jewels, her baby clothes, and the paper he had found pinned to her cloak. Leontes received them with great kindness. He was very polite to Prince Floresell, but all his looks were for Perdita. He saw how much she was like the Queen Hermione, and said again and again, "Such a sweet creature my daughter might have been, if I had not cruelly sent her from me." When the old shepherd heard that the king had lost a baby daughter, who had been left upon the coast of Bohemia, he felt sure that Perdita, the child he had reared, must be the king's daughter. And when he told his tale and showed the jewels in the paper, the king perceived that Perdita was indeed his long-lost child. He welcomed her with joy and rewarded the good shepherd. Polixenes had hastened after his son to prevent his marriage with Perdita, but when he found that she was the daughter of his old friend, he was only too glad to give his consent. Yet Leontes could not be happy. He remembered how his fair queen, who should have been at his side to share his joy and his daughter's happiness, was dead through his unkindness, and he could say nothing for a long time but, "Oh, thy mother, and ask forgiveness of the King of Bohemia, and then kiss his daughter again, and then the Prince Floresell, and then thank the old shepherd for all his goodness." Then Paulina, who had been high all these years in the king's favor because of her kindness to the dead Queen Hermione, said, "I have a statue made in the likeness of the dead queen, a piece many years in doing, and performed by the rare Italian master, Giulio Romano. I keep it in a private house apart, and there, ever since you lost your queen, I have gone twice or thrice a day. Will it please your majesty to go and see the statue?" So Leontes and Polixenes and Floresell and Perdita, with Camillo and their attendants, went to Paulina's house, and there was a heavy purple curtain screening off an alcove, and Paulina, with her hand on the curtain, said, "She was peerless when she was alive, and I do believe that her dead likeness excels whatever yet you have looked upon, or that the hand of man hath done. Therefore I keep it lonely, apart. But here it is. Behold, and say 'tis well." And with that she drew back the curtain and showed them the statue. The king gazed and gazed on the beautiful statue of his dead wife, but said nothing. "I like your silence," said Paulina. "It the more shows off your wonder. But speak, is it not like her?" "It is almost herself," said the king. "And yet, Paulina, Hermione was not so much wrinkled, nothing like so old as this seems." "Oh, not by much," said Polixenes. "Ah," said Paulina, "that is the cleverness of the carver, who shows her to us as she would have been, had she lived till now." And still Leontes looked at the statue and could not take his eyes away. "If I had known," said Paulina, "that this poor image would have so stirred your grief and love, I would not have shown it to you." But he only answered, "Do not draw the curtain." "No, you must not look any longer," said Paulina, "or you will think it moves." Let be," said the king. "Would you not think it breathed?" "I will draw the curtain," said Paulina. "You will think it lives presently." "Ah, sweet Paulina," said Leontes, "make me to think so 20 years together." "If you can bear it," said Paulina, "I can make the statue move. Make it come down and take you by the hand. Only you would think it was by wicked magic." "Whatever you can make her do, I am content to look on," said the king. And then, all folks there admiring and beholding, the statue moved from its pedestal, and came down the steps and put its arm round the king's neck, and he held her face and kissed her many times, for this was no statue, but the real living Queen Hermione herself. She had lived, hidden by Paulina's kindness, all these years, and would not have discovered herself to her husband, though she knew he had repented, because she could not quite forgive him till she knew what had become of her little baby. Now that Perdita was found, she forgave her husband everything, and it was like a new and beautiful marriage to them to be together once more. Floresell and Perdita were married, and lived long and happily. To Leontes, his long years of suffering were well paid for, in the moment when, after long grief and pain, he felt the arms of his true love round him once again. Now this next one is a very famous one, but I'm going to read it anyway. King Lear. There have been many adaptations of this story. There's actually a wonderful black and white Japanese adaptation by Kurosawa, I believe. That's a lot of fun. Great piece of cinema. But let's read the original. Let me try and get that. King Lear. Here we go. It's King Lear rejecting Cordelia. King Lear was old and tired. He was aweary of the business of his kingdom, and wished only to end his days quietly near his 3 daughters, whom he loved dearly. 2 of his daughters were married to the Dukes of Albany and Cornwall, and the Duke of Burgundy and the King of France were both staying at Lear's court as suitors for the hand of Cordelia, his youngest daughter. Lear called his 3 daughters together and told them that he proposed to divide his kingdom between them. "But first," said he, "I should like to know how much you love me." Goneril, who was really a very wicked woman and did not love her father at all, said she loved him more than words could say. She loved him dearer than eyesight, space, or liberty, more than life, grace, health, beauty, and honor. "If you love me as much as this," said the king, "I give you a 3rd part of my kingdom." "And how much does Regan love me?" "I love you as much as my sister and more," professed Regan, "since I care for nothing but my father's love." Lear was very much pleased with Regan's professions and gave her another 3rd part of his fair kingdom. Then he turned to his youngest daughter, Cordelia. "Now our joy, though last not least," he said. "The best part of my kingdom have I kept for you. What can you say?" "Nothing, my lord," answered Cordelia. "Nothing?" "Nothing," said Cordelia. "Nothing can come of nothing. Speak again," said the king. And Cordelia answered, "I love you, your majesty, according to my duty, no more, no less." And this she said because she knew her sisters' wicked hearts, and was disgusted by the way that they had professed unbounded and impossible love, when really they had not even a right sense of duty to their old father. "I am your daughter," she went on, "and you have brought me up and loved me, and I return you those duties back as are right fit, obey you, love you, and most honor you." Lear, who loved Cordelia best, had wished her to make more extravagant professions of love than her sisters, and what seemed to him her coldness so angered him that he bade her begone from his sight. "Go," he said, "be forever a stranger to my heart and me." The Earl of Kent, one of Lear's favorite courtiers and captains, tried to say a word for Cordelia's sake, but Lear would not listen. He divided the remaining part of his kingdom between Goneril and Regan, who had pleased him with their foolish flattery, and told them that he should only keep 100 knights at arms for his following, and would live with his daughters by turns. When the Duke of Burgundy knew that Cordelia would have no share of the kingdom, he gave up his courtship of her. But the King of France was wiser, and said to her, "Fairest Cordelia, thou art most rich, being poor, most choice, forsaken, and most loved, despised. Thee and thy virtues here I seize upon. Thy dowerless daughter, king, is queen of us, of ours, and of our fair France." Take her, said the king, "for I have no such daughter, and will never see the face of hers again." So Cordelia became Queen of France, and the Earl of Kent, for having ventured to take her part, was banished from the king's court and from the kingdom. The king now went to stay with his daughter Goneril, and very soon began to find out how much fair words were worth. She had got everything from her father that he had to give, and she began to grudge even the 100 knights that he had reserved for himself. She frowned at him whenever she met him. She herself was harsh and undutiful to him, and her servants treated him with neglect, and either refused to obey his orders or pretended they did not hear them. Now the Earl of Kent, when he was banished, made as though he would go into another country, but instead he came back in the disguise of a serving man, and took service with the king, who never suspected him to be that Earl of Kent, whom he himself had banished. The very same day that Lear engaged him as his servant, Goneril's steward insulted the king, and the Earl of Kent showed his respect for the king's majesty by tripping up the caitiff into the gutter. The king now had 2 friends, the Earl of Kent, whom he only knew as his servant, and his fool, who was faithful to him, although he had given away his kingdom. Goneril was not contented with letting her father suffer insults at the hands of her servants. She told him plainly that his train of 100 knights only served to fill her court with riot and feasting, and so she begged him to dismiss them, and only keep a few old men about him, such as himself. "My train are men who will know all parts of their duty," said Lear. "Saddle my horses, call my train together. Goneril, I will not trouble you further, yet I have left another daughter. And he cursed his daughter Goneril, praying that she might never have a child, or that if she had, it might treat her as cruelly as she had treated him. And his horses being saddled, he set out with his followers for the castle of Regan, his other daughter. Lear sent on his servant Caius, who was really the Earl of Kent, with letters to his daughter to say he was coming. But Caius fell in with the messenger of Goneril, in fact that very steward whom he had tripped into the gutter, and beat him soundly for the mischief-maker that he was. And Regan, when she heard it, put Caius in the stocks, not respecting him as a messenger coming from her father. And she who had formerly outdone her sister in professions of attachment to the king, now seemed to outdo her in undutiful conduct, saying that 50 knights were too many to wait on him, that 25 were enough. And Goneril, who had hurried thither to prevent Regan showing any kindness to the old man, said 25 were too many, or even 10 or even 5, since her servants could wait on him. What need one? Said Regan. Then when Lear saw that what they really wanted was to drive him away from them, he cursed them both and left them. It was a wild and stormy night, yet those cruel daughters did not care what became of their father in the cold and the rain, but they shut the castle doors and went in out of the storm. All night he wandered about the heath, half mad with misery, and with no companion but the poor fool. But presently his servant Caius, the good Earl of Kent, met him, and at last persuaded him to lie down in a wretched little hovel which stood upon the heath. At daybreak the Earl of Kent removed his royal master to Dover, where his old friends were, and then hurried to the court of France and told Cordelia what had happened. Her husband gave her an army to go to the assistance of her father, and with it she landed at Dover. Here she found poor King Lear, now quite mad, wandering about the fields, singing aloud to himself, and wearing a crown of nettles and weeds. They brought him back, and fed him and clothed him, and the doctors gave him such medicines as they thought might bring him back to his right mind, and by he woke better, but still not quite himself. Then Cordelia came to him and kissed him, to make up, as she said, for the cruelty of her sisters. At first he hardly knew her. "Pray do not mock me," he said. "I am a very foolish, fond old man, 80 and upward, and to deal plainly, I fear that I am not in my perfect mind. I think I should know you, though I do not know these garments, nor do I know where I lodged last night. Do not laugh at me, though, as I am a man. I think this lady must be my daughter Cordelia." "And so I am," cried Cordelia. "Come with me." "You must bear with me," said Lear. "Forget and forgive. I am old and foolish." And now he at last knew which of his children it was that had loved him best, and who was worthy of his love, and from that time they were not parted. Goneril and Regan joined their armies to fight Cordelia's army, and were successful, and Cordelia and her father were thrown into prison. Then Goneril's husband, the Duke of Albany, who was a good man, and had not known how wicked his wife was, heard the truth of the whole story, and when Goneril found that her husband knew her for the wicked woman she was, she killed herself, having a little time before given a deadly poison to her sister Regan, out of a spirit of jealousy. But they had arranged that Cordelia should be hanged in prison, and though the Duke of Albany sent messengers at once, it was too late. The old king came staggering into the tent of the Duke of Albany, carrying the body of his dear daughter Cordelia in his arms. "Oh, she is gone forever," he said. "I know when one is dead, and when one lives, she's dead as earth." They crowded round in horror. "Oh, if she lives," said the king, "it is a chance that does redeem all the sorrows that ever I have felt." The Earl of Kent spoke a word to him, but Lear was too mad to listen. "Plague upon you murderous traitors all! I might have saved her. Now she is gone forever. Cordelia, Cordelia, stay a little." Her voice was ever low, gentle and soft, an excellent thing. "I killed the slave that was hanging thee." "True, my lords, he did," said one of the officers from the castle. "Oh, that will come no more," cried the poor old man. "Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there." And with that he fell with her, still in his arms, and died. And this was the end of Lear and Cordelia. So obviously, a tragedy. Now let's finish with a more pleasant story, somewhat similar, but with a different kind of ending. This one's at least a comedy. The Tempest. Prospero, the Duke of Milan, was a learned and studious man who lived among his books, leaving the management of his dukedom to his brother Antonio, in whom he had complete trust. But that trust was ill rewarded, for Antonio wanted to wear the duke's crown himself, and to gain his ends he would have killed his brother, but for the love the people bore him. However, with the help of Prospero's great enemy, Alonso, king of Naples, he managed to get into his hands the dukedom, with all its honor, power, and riches. For they took Prospero to sea, and when they were far away from land, forced him into a little boat with no tackle, mast, or sail. In their cruelty and hatred, they put his little daughter Miranda, not yet 3 years old, into the boat with them, and sailed away, leaving them to their fate. But one among the courtiers with Antonio was true to his rightful master, Prospero. To save the duke from his enemies was impossible, but much could be done to remind him of a subject's love. So this worthy lord, whose name was Gonzalo, secretly placed in the boat some fresh water, provisions, and clothes, and what Prospero valued most of all, some of his precious books. The boat was cast on an island, and Prospero and his little one landed in safety. Now this island was enchanted, and for years had lain under the spell of a fell witch, Sycorax, who had imprisoned in the trunks of trees all the good spirits she found there. She died shortly before Prospero was cast on those shores, but the spirits of whom Ariel was the chief still remained in their prisons. Prospero was a great magician, for he had devoted himself almost entirely to the study of magic during the years in which he had allowed his brother to manage the affairs of Milan. By his art he set free the imprisoned spirits, yet kept them obedient to his will, and they were more truly his subjects than the people in Milan had been, for he treated them kindly as long as they did his bidding, and he exercised his power over them wisely and well. One creature alone he found it necessary to treat with harshness. This was Caliban, the son of the wicked old witch, a hideous, deformed monster, horrible to look on, and vicious and brutal in all his habits. When Miranda was grown up into a maiden, sweet and fair to see, it chanced that Antonio and Alonso, with Sebastian his brother, and Ferdinand his son, were at sea together with old Gonzalo, and their ship came near Prospero's island. Prospero, knowing they were there, raised by his art a great storm, so that even the sailors on board gave themselves up for lost, and first among them all Prince Ferdinand leaped into the sea, and his father thought in his grief he was drowned. But Ariel brought him safe ashore, and all the rest of the crew, although they were washed overboard, were landed unhurt in different parts of the island, and the good ship herself, which they all thought had been wrecked, lay at anchor in the harbor whither Ariel had brought her. Such wonders could Prospero and his spirits perform. Yet while the tempest was raging, Prospero showed his daughter the brave ship, laboring in the trough of the sea, and told her that it was filled with living beings like themselves. She, in pity of their lives, prayed him who had raised this storm to quell it. Then her father bade her to have no fear, for he intended to save every one of them. Then, for the first time, he told her the story of his life and hers, and what had caused this storm to rise that he had caused this storm to rise, in order that his enemies, Antonio and Alonso, who were on board, might be delivered into his hands. When he had made an end of his story, he charmed her into sleep, for Ariel was at hand, and he had work for him to do. Ariel, who longed for his complete freedom, grumbled to be kept in drudgery, but on being reminded of all the sufferings he had undergone when Sycorax ruled in the land, and of the debt of gratitude he owed to the master who had made those sufferings to end, he ceased to complain and promised faithfully to do whatever Prospero might command. I'll show you a quick picture real quick. Here's Prospero. Then he bade Ariel, Do so, said Prospero, and in 2 days I will discharge thee. Then he bade Ariel take the form of a water nymph, and sent him in search of the young prince, and Ariel, invisible to Ferdinand, hovered near him, singing the while, "Come into these yellow sands, and then take hands, curtsied when you have, and kissed the wild waves whist, footed faintly here and there, and sweet sprites the burden bear." And Ferdinand followed the magic singing, as the song changed to a solemn air, and the words brought grief to his heart and tears to his eyes, for thus they ran, "Full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made, those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Sea nymphs hourly ring his knell, hark, now I hear them, ding-dong bell." And so singing, Ariel led the spellbound prince into the presence of Prospero and Miranda. Then behold, all happened as Prospero desired. For Miranda, who had never, since she could first remember, seen any human being save her father, looked on the youthful prince with reverence in her eyes and love in her secret heart. "I might call him," she said, "a thing divine, for nothing natural I ever saw so noble." And Ferdinand, beholding her beauty with wonder and delight, exclaimed, "Most sure the goddess on whom these airs attend." Nor did he attempt to hide the passion which she inspired in him, for scarcely had they exchanged 6 sentences before he vowed to make her his queen if she were willing. But Prospero, though secretly delighted, pretended wrath. "You came here as a spy," he said to Ferdinand. "I will manacle your neck and feet together, and you shall feed on fresh-water mussels, withered roots and husk, and have sea-water to drink. Follow." "No," said Ferdinand, and drew his sword. But on the instant Prospero charmed him, so that he stood there like a statue, still as stone. And Miranda in terror prayed her father to have mercy on her lover. But he harshly refused her and made Ferdinand follow him to his cell. There he set the prince to work, making him remove thousands of heavy logs of timber and pile them up, and Ferdinand patiently obeyed, and thought his toil all too well repaid by the sympathy of the sweet Miranda. She in very pity would have helped him in his hard work, but he would not let her, yet he could not keep from her the secret of his love, and she, hearing it, rejoiced, and promised to be his wife. Then Prospero released him from his servitude, and glad at heart he gave his consent to their marriage. "Take her," he said, "she is thine own." In the meantime, Antonio and Sebastian, in another part of the island, were plotting the murder of Alonso, the king of Naples. For Ferdinand being dead, so as they thought, Sebastian would succeed to the throne on Alonso's death. And they would have carried out their wicked purpose while their victim was asleep, but that Ariel woke him in good time. Many tricks did Ariel play them. Once he set a banquet before them, and just as they were going to fall to, he appeared to them amid thunder and lightning in the form of a harpy, and immediately the banquet disappeared. Then Ariel upbraided them with their sins, and vanished too. Prospero, by his enchantments, drew them all to the grove without his cell, where they waited, trembling and afraid, and now at last bitterly repenting of their sins. Prospero determined to make one last use of his magic power. "And then," said he, "I'll break my staff, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book." So he made heavenly music to sound in the air, and appeared to them in his proper shape as the Duke of Milan. Because they repented, he forgave them, and told them the story of his life since they had cruelly committed him and his baby daughter to the mercy of wind and waves. Alonso, who seemed sorriest of them all for his past crimes, lamented the loss of his heir. But Prospero drew back a curtain and showed them Ferdinand and Miranda playing at chess. Great was Alonso's joy to greet his loved son again, and when he heard that the fair maid with whom Ferdinand was playing was Prospero's daughter, and that the young folks had plighted their troth, he said, "Give me your hands. Let grief and sorrow still embrace his heart that doth not wish you joy." So all ended happily. The ship was safe in the harbor, and next day they all set sail for Naples, where Ferdinand and Miranda were to be married. Ariel gave them calm seas and auspicious gales, and many were the rejoicings at the wedding. Then Prospero, after many years of absence, went back to his own dukedom, where he was welcomed with great joy by his faithful subjects. He practiced the arts of magic no more, but his life was happy, and not only because he had found his own again, but chiefly because, when his bitterest foes who had done him deadly wrong lay at his mercy, he took no vengeance on them, but nobly forgave them. As for Ariel, Prospero made him free as air, so that he could wander where he would, and sing with a light heart his sweet song. Where the bee sucks, there suck I, in a cowslip's bell I lie, there I couch when owls do cry, on the bat's back do I fly. After summer merrily, merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the blossom that hangs on the bough. The end. And that's all of this for today. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.